All right. I want you to open your Bibles to the book of 2 Samuel, the 19th chapter. And we're still in the dispensation of law. And the good Lord willing, we're going to end up with law tonight. And then get ready to go into grace. And then from grace into the kingdom. So this is the 5th dispensation. The Lord willing, next week we'll go to the 6th dispensation and then on to the 7th dispensation. And we'll end up with grace in the book of Revelation. That's what, people ever since I've come here have been wanting to get to and ask questions about. So I probably can't answer any of your questions, but we'll just skim it and go through it. In the book of 2 Samuel, the 19th chapter, I want to go back and rehearse for just 1 minute and see what got us to where we're at. David had become king of Israel. God had blessed him in everything that he had done. David had been faithful in fighting all the wars. When it came time for kings to go out to battle, he did not. He stayed home. He saw Bathsheba while he was walking on his roof. Had her brought up to his house, committed adultery with her, sent her back. Then he had her husband killed, and then after that, he married Bathsheba. The baby was born. God took the life of that child. And then he went in and lay with Bathsheba, and she conceived, and she bare a son, and they named him Solomon, but God named him Jedediah. God named him Jedediah because God loved him. God loved him. Now, after that, David was approached by Nathan. He was told a story about a man had one lamb, and another man in the land was rich and he had many. A stranger came to the man's house. Instead of him taking one of his many sheep and slaying it, he went over and he got the sheep of the man that had just the one. And David became infuriated, and Nathan said, well, you are the man that did that. You took Uriah's wife and you had him killed. And this just, boy, sticks in my mind so much that God said to David, David, I gave you Saul's wives. I gave you everything, and if that was not enough, why didn't you ask me? If you just asked me, I would have given you more. So that tells me that we never take into our own hands those things that we want. We ought to ask God. Right. Sometimes God says no. Right. Sometimes God says, you've got enough. You're where I want you. Dwell there, live there, be there. But then he told David, he said, because you've done this, the trouble is going to come out of your house. You did this thing in secret. I'm going to bring it all to light. And he said, you're going to have a lot of problems. It's not going to come from the Philistines. It's not going to come from enemies outside. But he said, I'm going to wear you out. And that's exactly what God started doing. The first thing that happened is that David's son and David's daughter, his son raped his daughter. And then Absalom, the older brother, took and had the son killed. And then after that, Absalom, they anointed him king of 12 tribes of Israel, 10 tribes of Israel, and that he was rendering the kingdom out of David's hands. So David leaves and he heads off, and there was a guy from Saul's household that he came out with a handful of rocks and started rocking David. And not only rocking him, but he gave him a good cussing. I got hung up on that. You did. And this is what he said to him. He said, come out, for you are a bloody man. Now think on this. God knew that David had shed blood. David knew that he had shed blood. Joab knew that he had shed blood. This guy didn't know. Nathan knew. So he came out giving David a cussing, rocking him, and throwing dust in the air. And David's men said, let's go up there and just cut his head off. David said, leave him alone. Now why would David say that? He said, that's a message from God. God had told him. Now what did David, or God tell David? He said, you've done this in secret. But he said, I'm going to bring it out in the open. Everybody's going to know it. So David called this old cussing boy out with a handful of rocks throwing dust and he blasted David, and David left him alone. Now, but it said all this time that God demands a broken heart. David never had a broken heart over any of his sins. But now that God is going to break his heart because David had a son that he loved, and he was the apple of his eye, and his name was Absalom, that tried to render the kingdom out of his hand. And so Absalom had long hair. He's riding along on his little mule. There was a fork in the tree. His hair got caught in it. They told Joab. Joab took darts and put him through. Shot him through, and then 10 men from the army went and they slew him too. Then they buried him. And then when David saw him coming, he said, how is it with Absalom? How is it with Absalom, my son? And they told him that Absalom was dead. David turned his face to the wall. He cried out to God, and he said, oh Absalom, I wished it had been me. I wished it had just been me instead of you. And so we see that God demands a broken heart. God got a broken heart from David. Now in the 19th chapter, Joab is going to come to David for the second time. He came and delivered the message of his son, and now he comes back to David, and he tells him, I want you to look in the 4th verse. He tells him about what he's done. But the king covered his face, and he cried with a loud voice, oh my son Absalom, and Absalom my son. And so Joab comes to the king's house, and look in the 7th and 8th verses. This is what he's going to explain to him. Now, therefore, arise, go forth, and speak comfortably unto the servants, for I will swear to the Lord, if thou go not forth, thou wilt not tarry one that with thee this night, and there will be the worse until thee than all the evil that befell thee from thy youth until now. And the king arose and sat in the gate. Now because of what David had done, Joab says to him, Israel does not respect you. Israel has no time for you. You didn't deal with your son Absalom when he tried and he took the kingdom from you. And he says, this is what I want you to do. You need to go out and you need to talk to the people and you need to repent and tell them that you're wrong. Now this is the king. So the king goes outside the city and he sits at the gate, and the children of Israel pass by and file by, and here David is the king. Boy, he's trying to get things right with them. So after they do that, then David returns unto Jerusalem. And after he returns to Jerusalem, there are wars that he fights. There are battles that he won. But over in the 24th chapter, we're going to see David sin. A grave sin. Now you'd think that David would learn and he would not sin anymore after he'd been caught in all these things. But in the 24th chapter, David sins, and he sins because he numbers. He wants to know how many warriors that he has in Israel. I want to know. Joab said to him, why do you want to do such a thing? I think because of pride. We all like to boast. We all like to brag. And I think it was an ego thing with David. David wanted to know how many soldiers that he had. Now it says when he numbered them and he came back to them, this is in the 9th verse of the 24th chapter, and Joab gave up the sum of the number of the people unto the king, and there was in Israel 800,000 valiant men that drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 500,000 men. Now that makes a total of 1,300,000. That's a pretty good sized army. Pretty good. How big is our army of the United States of America? Well, since Obama has started cutting, we're down to almost 400,000. 1,300,000 fighting men. We're kind of small to what Israel is. Yeah. And think how small Israel is. But one thing about it, they've got God on their side. Right. Now in the 10th verse of that 24th chapter, because David numbered the mighty men, the men of valor, the soldiers that he had, then he realized that he had sinned against God. And he smote himself on the chest. He knew that he had sinned greatly in the eyes of the Lord, and that fear of God came upon him. And in the 12th verse, it says that, they went to David and said unto David, thus saith the Lord, I offer thee 3 things. Choose thee 3 of them that I may do unto thee. Now there were 3 things that God was going to give him to choose from because of punishment. My parents never did do me this way. They never said, you can either go standing in the corner or you'll get a whipping. They did the whipping, and that was it. Now in school, after he got in high school, they gave you a choice. 3 days, 3 licks. Well, I'd take the days, wouldn't you? Amen. Matter of pride. A matter of pride. I got caught my senior year. Mr. Pfizer said 3 days, 3 licks. But said if you take the 3 days, you missed your semester exams and you flunked and you have to come back and repeat. And I said, as bad as I don't want to, I'm going to have to take the 3 licks, and I took them. That broke my heart. The pride of a principal, another man, me bending over the desk, and him swatting me. It wasn't the pain. That didn't bother me. It wasn't the swatting. It was people out there knew that I got it. Now that's what hurt. So David said here, or God said to David, these are your choices. In the 13th verse, he said there will be a 7-year famine, if you want to choose that. Or you can flee before your enemies. They'll run you for 3 months. Or you can have pestilence on all the land for 3 days. Now here the king is. Now he made a lot of wrong decisions in his life. But I can't help but think the light bulb came on inside that little pea brain of his. And this is what he said. He said, you know, God is a just God. God is a merciful God. Instead of me picking what's going to happen, I'm going to let God choose. Whatever God decides, whether we be run for 3 months or 7 years, or pestilence come, we be in a famine or whatever, I'm going to let God choose. So this is what God did. God sent pestilence upon all of Israel. There were 7,000 killed. 7,000 killed. A merciful God. Now it says the angel of the Lord stretched his hand out during those 3 days. And then 3 days he took his hand off. And then it says that the angel stretched his hand out over Jerusalem. Now 7,000 had been killed. Look at the 17th verse. And David spake unto the Lord when he saw the angel that smote the people, and said, Lo, I have sinned, and I have done wickedness, but these sheep, talking about Israel, talking about the people in Jerusalem, what have they done? Let thy hand, I pray thee, be against me and against my father's house. God, don't do this. Those people are innocent. You deal with me. I'm the man that is sinning. And you're talking about him having a change of mind. And it says that God repented. God changed his mind. Now it is possible to get to God to change his mind. What king was there that he was going to die and God required his life, and he turned his face to the wall and prayed and God spared him? Who was it? You got to talk loud. I'm hard to hear. And God gave him how many more years? 15 years. Go home and look his name up. You'll always remember it. Hezekiah. So you can change God's mind. It's not set in rock. So God changed his mind here and didn't destroy Jerusalem. And so, from there, David is now, he's getting old. He's wearing out. In the book of 1 Kings, the first chapter and the first 5 verses, it says David was getting well stricken in years, and they covered him with clothes. Old David was just about had it. So they said, well, this is what we need to do. In order to get him revived up, we need to find him a virgin. That's before they had electric blankets. He is cold. What happens to you when you get old? You old people that's in here, are you cold-natured?
Yes.
I used to go outside barefooted without my shirt on in snow for years. Hot-natured. But now, I want to stay close to the fire. So David was well stricken in years, so they went and got a virgin. And she cherished him, and she lay with him. The Bible said he knew her not. But he didn't it says he didn't gather any heat. So he wasn't revived. He wasn't revived. He did not get warm. He was aching to the bone. Now, while David is in such bad shape, God ain't finished with him yet. David had a lot of wives. Solomon was his son, and Adonijah was his son. So David was on his deathbed, and David sick, and David cold, And Adonijah said, I'm going to go down and talk to Joab, and I'm going to talk to the high priest, and I'm not going to let Daddy know anything about it, and I'm going to become king. So that's exactly what he did. He went to him and he said, I want you to help me. And so they did. They gave a feast. They offered sacrifices. The high priest and Joab went along with it. Now Joab was the captain of David's army. So he was putting all his ducks in a row. And then Nathan, which was the priest prophet of God, he went and called Bathsheba, which was the mother of Solomon. Now Adonijah had a different mother because there was many wives. But Solomon was the older of the two. And so Solomon, his mother Bathsheba, and Nathan got together, and Nathan said, have you heard what Adonijah's doing? And she said, no, what's he doing? Said, well, he's got Joab and the high priest, and said they're making him king. They've already anointed him. They made sacrifices, and they've anointed him king of Israel. I thought Solomon was going to be king. She said, this is the plan. So Nathan came up with a plan. He said, I want you to go in, and I want you to meet with the king, and you ask him this question. Do you know that Adonijah, that he is over and been anointed and thrown a great feast and didn't even invite Solomon? And he said, after you present all these things, I'm going to come in and I'm going to talk to him. So he did, presented all these things to him, and said, David, I thought that Solomon was going to be the one that sat on your throne. This is what he said. Where is Bathsheba? Said, you bring her back in. She came back in and told Nathan and told Bathsheba together that Solomon would be on his throne, that no one else would be on his throne, that he would be anointed as king. Now in the first chapter of 1 Kings, after he told him that he would be anointed a king, 39th and 38th verses of the first chapter, it talks about, and they took him, they anointed him with oil out of the tabernacle, and Solomon became king, and they blew the trumpet. All the way through, every time there was a king that was crowned, they always anointed him with oil, and they always blew the trumpet in order to let everybody know that there had been a king anointed. Now, Adonijah and Joab and all the rest of the group, they were across town. He was over there proposing himself to be king. And so here now, Solomon is anointed king. The trumpet blows. Joab hears it. He goes in and said, what's the news? What's happening? And they told him. Well, Adonijah and the rest of the group, it said the rest of the group feared, and they took off running. Now, Adonijah, where did he go? He went to the tabernacle. He headed out to the house of God. Now, where does everybody want to go when there's problems? Man, when you're in distress, you want to go to the house of God. So he went to the house of God, and when he got there, the Bible said that he took hold of the horns of the altar. Now here Solomon is, anointed king. Adonijah's half-brother, which wanted to be king, is in the tabernacle, the house of God, and he's got a hold of the horns of the altar. So Solomon said, go down and bring him up here. They got down and they said, turn the altar loose. He said, I got it by the horns, and I'm not letting go, because if I let go, you'll take me up to Solomon and he'll kill me. He said, I'm not letting go. So they went back up and told Solomon. He said, tell him I'm not going to kill him. Go on home. So things is progressing. Now, poor old David's laying on his deathbed, and here's his boys out fighting. I mean, this is a heck of a note. His house is in shambles, spiritually. His house is being torn apart because of his lust. God's dealing one by one by one by one with it. Now Nathan, after he spoke to Bathsheba, Solomon had been anointed king. David dies. This is in the 2nd chapter, the 10th verse. Now, Adonijah, he wants to get married. Now, Solomon has spared his life. Now, these are two brothers that's still going at it. So what does he do? He goes to his stepmother. He goes to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. Now, you would think if anybody has influence over the son, that it would be his mother. And he said to her, I want you to do one thing for me. And she said, say on. Said, I want you to go to your son, my half-brother, and I want you to ask him to give me permission to marry this woman. And she said, all right, I'll do that. She goes up and she asks Solomon. And Solomon said, it ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna happen. Now what does Solomon do? He sends somebody down to kill him. What did God tell him? All this is going to take place in your house. This is where the war, the enemies is going to happen, where it's going to come from. It's going to take place in your house. So after that, Abiathar was the priest that went along with this king business. Solomon removes him from being king. And Joab, which was the head of the army of David, which went along with Solomon's brother being king, he sent after him. Now, here's this same trick again. When he sent after Joab, Joab lit him a shuck, and he went to the tabernacle, and he went in and grabbed hold of the horns of the altar. He figured if it worked for him, it'll work for me. So Solomon said, go down and kill him. Old boy said, I'm not turning loose the horns of the altar. Went back up, told Solomon a couple of times. And Solomon sent the man down that time, and he told him, said, you kill him right there. Kill him right there. And that's exactly what happened to Joab. Now David had paid a price. But even after the death of David, the price was still being paid. It was still going on. Now, the 7th chapter of 1 Kings, it says, or the 3rd chapter, the 3rd chapter in the first verse, it talks about, here's the downfall of Solomon. Everything going along good with him. But then he made a treaty with Pharaoh's house, the Egyptians. And he spied him out, somebody that he liked. That's the reason that he made a treaty with him. It was Pharaoh's daughter. And he married Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into his household. And then the 7th chapter, the 4th verse, it talks about him going to Gibeon. And there Solomon is going to make sacrifices to God. How many sacrifices did he offer at Gibeon? 1,000. 1,000 sacrifices. That's a whole heap of sacrifices. Now think about this for 1 minute. From the time of Abraham that he offered Isaac to the time that Jesus Christ came and gave his life, until 70 AD, when the Romans came in and overthrew Jerusalem and tore the temple down, how much blood was shed during that period of time? I don't know this, but some experts have said from the beginning of the Mississippi River to the ending of the Mississippi River, the banks would not hold the blood that was shed during this period of time. Now think on this. Of all the blood that was shed during that period of time, not one soul ever got saved. Because it took the sacrifice of the God-man, Jesus Christ, shedding his blood in order to get souls saved. One drop of his blood was mountains higher than all the blood of animals that was ever shed. So Solomon, he shed the blood of 1,000 sacrifices. Now after that, we find in the that Solomon is going to pray. I think this is in the 5th chapter. I'll find it in a minute. It's in the 11th chapter. This is Solomon's prayer. Now he's already king. God's anointed him king. He's already assumed his position. Now it comes to the place of what he's going to ask God for. Here he is, king. He's a young man. He's sitting on the throne in the, it's not the 11th chapter. It's in the 3rd chapter, 7th verse. 3rd chapter, 7th verse. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child, and I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of the people which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge the people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this way so great a people? And the speech pleased the Lord, and Solomon had asked this thing, and God said unto him, because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast thou riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all the days of thy life. And if thou wilt walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. So Solomon asked for one thing, wisdom. But because he asked for wisdom, God gave him all the things that he didn't ask for. Sometimes we ask for things that we want to consume on our own lust. Sometimes we ask for things that will puff us up and cause us to look better. But Solomon wanted one thing. He was the ruler. He was the king. And he knew that he was, in his own mind, he said, I am but a little child. I don't know anything. So you're going to have to give this to me. And God did. The first execution of his witness, of his wisdom, in 1 Kings 3rd chapter 16th verse, it said that there were two women that were prostitutes. And they had babies about 3 days old. One morning, the third night, when the one was sleeping, she lay on her baby and smothered that baby to death. So she got up and she took her baby and she went over to the other woman that had a living baby and she exchanged them. And so when the morning came and the woman that had the dead baby in bed with her, when she picked it up to nurse the baby was dead. But she knew in her mind that her baby was living. Now the live baby was over with the one that had laid on that baby that was dead and smothered it. And she said, "Give me my baby." She said, "That's your baby." She said, "My baby's not dead." So they went before the king. Wisdom. Now king's got to make judgment. The king's got to have understanding. He's got to look past what the evidence is. All you had was two people, and both of them, they had a different story. And he said, "Present this to me." And they presented the story. And Solomon said, "Well, this is my judgment. Bring me a sword." Said, "I want you to take this sword. Since there's two of you and one baby, we're going to cut it in half, and we're going to give each half." One of the prostitutes said, "Don't do that. Let her have the baby." Solomon said, "Give the baby to her." The other one said, "Cut it in two." Solomon knew wisdom. Solomon knew because he had asked God. God gave him this. You know as a mother and you know as a dad, if you had the choice of saying, "Let my child live, let him live with that one," or divide it in half and give me half, you know what your answer would be. Take my child over there and let it live with her, because that's flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. That's me. So Solomon, he had great wisdom. Now he rules on, and we're going to close this thing out on law and Solomon. Solomon was given the job of building the temple. David wanted to build a house of God. But God said, "No, you can't build my house." So he gave the task to Solomon. Solomon built the house of God. You can read all that yourself. I'm not going to go into all of it. He built the house of God, and after he built the house of God, he offered sacrifices. He dedicated it to the Lord, and everything was good in Israel, and everything was good in Jerusalem, and God had him a house that he could dwell in. God had him a house that people could come and meet with him. For the first time, God had a house that had foundations. For the first time, God had a building that would not be moved from place to place. You remember that in the desert, you remember in the wilderness, when they built the tabernacle and they moved it. God was always on the move, but God said, "I've got me a house now. This is my house." You think Solomon would have locked on to that? That was a good thing. But you remember what he did in the beginning of his ministry? He signed a treaty with Pharaoh, and he married him a heathen woman. Now, this is the reason. This is not any scripture that in the New Testament that we can point to. There's a lot of them that leads to it. This is why that we teach as Christians that a Christian marry a Christian. That a Christian date a Christian. Now, think about this for a minute. You are a child of God. Now, women is worse than men. Because it's a woman's nature, they think they can fix anything. That is a woman's nature. Barbara Crow, she was going to fix me. Now, how'd that work? Didn't work out too good. Now, how about y'all? Have you tried to... I've watched this for all these years. A saved woman will marry an unsaved man. Or a saved man will marry an unsaved woman. And I promise you, 99 times out of 100, that unsaved person will lead that saved person away. There are occasions that that saved person will be so dedicated that they will lead that one, but not as a rule. So here's the problem that Solomon had. With all his wisdom, with all his knowledge that he had, he did not know what God had told him not to do would be a downfall. So Christians, if you're going to date somebody that's saved. Now let me go a step further. Date somebody that believes like you. I've watched this through the years. Both people are saved, both go to different denominations, and they have different beliefs. And they'll fuss and fight over it. He'll go to his church and she'll go to her church. And then they'll both quit and won't anybody go to anybody's church. So, talk about these things. Grandma and Grandpa, talk to your grandchildren. Talk to your great-grandchildren. Mom, Dad, talk to your children. I've listened to girls talk. Oh, he's good looking. All right. That's the first qualification. He is good looking. Second thing, man, did you see the car he's driving? Second qualification, the car he is driving. Did you see the way he's built? The way he is built. That just about stumps us, don't it? I mean, that's got us out of the picture. Why not talk about the things that's going to be lasting in life? Let me tell you, the beauty will wear off and the honeymoon will wear off. And then you're going to get up one morning and you're going to look across the table and you'll say to yourself, what in the world have I done? Am I knocking on your door? Barbara said that about me. I said that about her. I thought, Lord God, what have I got myself into now? But thank God for His mercy. Thank God for His blood. Thank God for His grace that He saved us. But man, that was torture. That was pure torture. So to avoid these things, do what God says. I want you to turn with us to the 11th chapter of 1 Kings. This will be easy. I like this beginning of this first verse. But Solomon loved many strange women. Woo! I don't know how he got along with all this. But second and third verses talked about that these women, God said, if you go to fooling with these heathen women, they're going to turn your heart. Solomon didn't want to listen to God about those things. So he got him 700 wives and princesses and 300 concubines. And it says their wives turned his heart. Now I got to thinking about this. That's a total of 1,000 of them. Now, he had him 1,000 of them. How many hours a year could he spend with 1,000 of them? In the neighborhood, about 8 hours. Now, that's not counting sleeping, eating, taking care of the daily administrative work that he had. That didn't count his personal time. That didn't count the time that he was going out to war. I mean, some of these things he never did see. But he had them. And what did they do to him? They turned his heart away from God. That's why we teach that Christians marry Christians, Christians date Christians. Because I'm telling you, the devil is slick, and he will move you away from God if he possibly can. 11th verse, and this is it. Wherefore the Lord saith unto Solomon, for as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant, my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely render the kingdom from thee, and will give it unto thy servant. The wisest man in the world had roving eyes. I think he got some concubines and wives that he never did see. He didn't have time to do any courting. I'm sure he sent somebody out and said, pick me out about 5. Bring them up. Do you know how long it'd take to marry 1,000 of them? Or 700? If you took an hour ceremony per, that's 700 hours of just ceremonies and marriage. Think on this. What do they call that thing after you get married when you eat? Reception. Oh, think of 700 receptions. Now think on this. You got you 1,000 of them. How much money are you going to have to feed them beans and potatoes? How many servants are you going to have to just cook for them? How many dressmakers are you going to have to clothe them? How many cows are you going to have to supply milk to them? I mean, this is a kingdom within itself. The wisest man that ever had lived, that ever would live, the book of Ecclesiastes is his book. At the end of his life, this was his conclusion. He said, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Everything that I did was for me, to feed my pleasure. So this is how law is going to end up. It goes on through other kings, other kings, other kings. It goes through prophets. But we'll come back one day, and there are major prophets and there are minor prophets in the Bible. We'll teach those. But now next week, good Lord willing, we're going to go to grace. But this has been a good time.
Yeah.
Maybe for many of you, this is the first time you've been through segments of the Old Testament. But until you know the Old Testament, you don't really appreciate the New Testament, because the Old Testament shows us from whence we came. The New Testament shows us where we are and whence we're going from here. Let's stand together.